First thing that happened was I was just so angry.
That when you first got diagnosed, it was anger, like of all the emotions.
Yep.
It wasn't sadness or fear, it was anger.
Yep.
Was there anger when Beck got diagnosed?
I wouldn't say anger because that anger, when it hit me, it was just so raw. So that's why I can explain that it was anger.
Jade Porter, welcome to The Greatest Comeback.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it,
feels
brother.
so weird to say that.
It does.
I still feel like a massive imposter when it comes to this. This is the second one that I've done. And the first one was like,
It's just,
oh my God,
it's on the up.
this is uncomfortable.
It's on the up. Imagine how good this one will be.
I know, right?
Yeah.
No pressure.
Number three will be amazing.
No
as
pressure.
Well. Yeah.
Dude, thank you for doing this.
Of course.
I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It's funny because I was mentioning the idea of a podcast to our friend Raf, who's here in the corner. And
He'll probably sneeze at some point if we don't work out the editing.
The first thing that came out of his mouth, oh, you got to get Jade. You got to get Jade. And truth be told, you were definitely on the list.
Yeah.
Because I think the hardest part, not the hardest part, but the most challenging part of this idea for me is actually finding people that don't have a comeback story, because I think everyone's got a comeback story, but are willing to talk about it. Mm. So from the get-go, I just want to pay homage to your willingness,
of course,
to talk about this.
Mate,
right?
It's free therapy for me, so it's actually a bargain.
And there's a lot of I think there's a lot of value in other people. And I think when I was thinking about asking you to do this, the first thing I thought of, because you've done the footy show and you've done, I mean, I'm assuming you've been interviewed by other people, and I know you've done some work around some foundations, and you know, this is somewhat of a passion project for you. But the first thought I had was, does he want to talk about it again?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because to some degree, like as an outsider looking in, I kind of think, is this the albatross that you just kind of want to get off your back because it's put, it's left such a fingerprint on your life?
Yeah, definitely not. I'm always happy to talk about it because it's always from a different angle. The people that I speak to the most about it, to be honest, are other people going through it.
Yeah.
I'll have a friend of a friend of a friend say, oh, this person's got something similar to you.
Yeah.
And I can't help but, want to reach out to that person and just, make them feel a bit better, maybe give them a bit of inspiration, help them with a couple of tips, some things I wish I did differently. Answer some questions because, I was speaking to a friend the other day whose wife's going through something, and, sometimes they have a doctor's appointment and they're in there for 15 minutes. They walk out, the time has flown. It felt like 5 seconds for them. They have 1,000 questions that are unanswered that I, not as a health professional, but someone who's been through it, can just give them a quick answer without them having to wait for that next appointment, which might be weeks or months away. So, so telling the story all the time, but, this is a totally different way of doing it, thinking about the comeback side of things.
Yeah.
And obviously for the podcast and your series. So, mate, it's every time's different. So happy to do it.
Yeah. The exciting part for me is, whilst we've known each other for a long time, we don't know each other that well. So I thought by way of setting this conversation up, it might be worthwhile just kind of talking about how you and I met and our history, because we met each other as part of the same aisle or pod of a bunch of sales guys at Dell.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember walking in the first day, and I remember exactly where you were sitting. You were at the back on the left-hand table.
Okay. Yep.
And you were... Murray Pettinger was part of that team.
Uncle Chop, yep.
Vicky Muscat, Leader, Jerry McGinty.
Good crew.
Claire Baker.
Yep. What a crew.
What a team.
Wow.
Huh? They've all gone on to do
It's crazy to think that, let's not put our age out there, but that was something like 25 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
Close to.
Ago.
So
yeah,
it doesn't feel like it. But good times working the New Zealand market. So getting up early, but also going home early, which was really good when you're a young man living down on the beach and, getting to the beach at like 3:30, which was 5:30 New Zealand time. So, or to the pub, either way.
Yeah. And my impression of you was, I didn't know you very well, but like you'd been there for a while. You were younger than me. And I just thought, fuck, this guy's really smart. He knows what's up. And, you had some agency around your job and what you were doing. And I always just thought that, this guy's going to do something in this career. That was my first impression. Like as someone that sort of aspired to do something as well, I looked at you and kind of thought, when you kind of, I've got that ability. And as a, when you run sales teams too, you've got to I think you develop the ability to kind of quickly go, okay,
Yep.
what are you going to bring?
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And I
sure.
just, even back then, I looked at you and thought, okay, this guy's got something that's, I don't know what that's going to turn into.
Yep.
But that was my first impression of you.
Well, mate, I appreciate
Yeah.
it. So, if it picks me up for the podcast, cool, I'll take it.
Yeah.
No, it was a really, really important time in life, and getting your feel for what you're going to do in your career. I was very young. At that time, I think I was actually 19.
You were super young. Yeah.
So I started at Dell when I was 18 years old, and basically fell into the company. And I saw how much money people were making for this IT thing, which was kind of a new thing at the time.
Yeah.
And thought, I've always enjoyed computer studies at school. I was going to do it at uni, but I just took some time off from uni. And fell into a computer company and thought, wow, I think I can do a lot more here. And ended up spending 20 years there, and which is insane.
Yeah. So I went and left and did some other stuff. And after that, our worlds didn't really overlap too much.
Yep.
Until, of course, you came and worked at CrowdStrike. But during that period where our worlds weren't sort of necessarily overlapping, I kind of lost touch with your story and what you were doing. But within that sort of professional network, you get word on the street that, hey, someone isn't doing so well, and that was the first time I got a sense that you were going through a difficult period of your life.
Yep.
And I think the only question I asked you in preparation for this was, do you remember the date of your diagnosis? And you do.
Absolutely.
Before and I'm keen to understand whether you actually remember the day and what. But before you answer that, can you give me a flavor for what your life was like? Just skim the tops of the waves for me. Where'd you grow up? What sort of childhood did you have? What were you as a young man? What were you doing? How were you spending your week?
Yeah. So look, to be honest, life was pretty like normal is the easiest way to explain it. And when I say normal, I'm talking about growing up as an Australian person in sort of middle income type family, good education, good family network, good friends, lots of sport, all that type of stuff. That's just growing up like a schooling people around Australia. So nothing really that interesting there. Obviously starting the career, and by that point I'd probably been at Dell. I would have been about 11 years. I think I'd just become a director of a solutions engineering team. And so, I started managing people quite young. So I was probably 4 or 5 years to manage people by that time. So, really, I guess, I'd become a manager quite young. So I'm thinking big things from a career perspective. From a family perspective, I'd been married, I think about 4 years by then. I had a daughter who was 2 years old at the time. So I'm just doing, what I would consider normal stuff for a 30-year-old. I'm playing local footy, rugby league. I'm playing touch footy with RAF and lots of people in that Dell network and winning lots of premierships and things like that. I was coaching kids football at the time as well, and just spending time with family. For us, like, what does that mean on the weekends? Beach, going to restaurants, little getaways, things like that. Pretty normal type holidays, beach holidays, in the summer, never winter holidays because it'd be things around football. But yeah, pretty normal life. I'd turn 30 in April that year.
Yeah.
So that sort of, I guess, maybe paints a picture, like active lifestyle, fun with friends, fun with family, enjoying my career.
A young man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's we've all been there. It's a nice place to be,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take me back.
It kind of sets up, the next part of the conversation, which is obviously things changed.
Yep.
Pretty dramatically.
Yeah, massive.
When was the first time you thought something didn't feel quite right?
I think, so probably August 2011.
Okay.
Was probably the first time. So we were sort of getting towards the end of the football season for local football, and I was just feeling like quite ill, just sort of physically ill. I had problems. I had like sounds stupid, but I had a really sore toe to the point where sometimes it would be so sore I couldn't like walk or run. Thought it could be gout. I'm like, I'm maybe a bit young for gout, but there are lifestyle factors there. Definitely wasn't gout, thankfully. It was way worse. But, maybe it would have been better to be gout. But I know some mates who talk about gout, they think it's pretty bad. But I had a sore back, lower back. It seems to be one of those things, I think, often, your lower back is a real, I don't know, important part of your body, I think. So sometimes, stress can find itself there. So yeah, and it got to the end of the season. Our team was going pretty well. The team I was coaching was going well. They ended up winning the grand final that year. Both teams, the A reserves and the 16s. And I just couldn't enjoy it. I couldn't play for a start. I was so ill. I just knew I couldn't play, and I thought it was a back injury, maybe from a tackle or something like that. But just felt ill. The day after we'd won the game, normally that would be a great celebration. I'd had plenty of celebrations like that in the past. The good old fashioned Mad Mondays. I actually drove to Mad Monday. Everyone thought it was pretty handy because I could drive people, around the place and things like that. But I just wasn't enjoying it at all. I think I was just delaying the inevitable. And then the next day, I remember, I don't know if it's a subconscious thing, but I actually went to my parents' house and just to sort of go, I was feeling so ill. I almost felt a comfort of being like at my parents' house. And my parents actually weren't there. I don't know where they were, but my brothers were at home. And so they were sort of looking after me and trying to, see what was going on. I had been to the doctor a fair few times already before this.
You had?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I'd been multiple times, blood tests, everything. And no one had any idea what was going on. So I'd for probably the month before, I wasn't like I was ignoring it. I was trying to get something sorted, but and so we're talking sort of late August, and I still had no idea. Yeah, yeah.
And so you'd had a couple of tests, and they'd come back
nothing.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wasn't diagnosed until October 17th.
Yeah.
A couple of months later. By that time, I'd been to hospital and back from hospital a couple of times. And again, multitude of tests, professors, specialists, all these types of things. No idea what's going on. And it wasn't until, so something like 2 months later, October 17 was when I was actually diagnosed. At the time, I was, before I got sick, I was probably, say, 5 kilos heavier than I am today, about probably 110 kilos. Probably when I was diagnosed, I was down to maybe 85 kilos. Which could have been maybe healthy, but it wasn't, unfortunately. A lot of weight.
So you'd already lost, what's that, 25 kilos?
25 kilos by that time. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Between August and October.
Yep. Easy.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you must have known there was something wrong.
Oh, everyone knew something was wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
They were asking me if I'd been to like Angola and places like
Really?
all sorts of crazy places to see if there was some kind of crazy disease that was out there in another country. Is that some way that you've been exposed to that? There was all sorts of theories that specialists had no idea. So they ended up sending a whole bunch of tests off around the world, blood and tissue samples and things. And some doctors came back from it was France or Germany, I can't remember, and they ended up diagnosing me.
Really?
That's how the actual diagnosis was made.
Wow.
Yeah, because none of the typical things had sort of shown up for a typical sort of cancer like this.
Yeah. And prior to the diagnosis, I mean, what was the mood like around the house and your family and your parents? They were all obviously worried about you.
Oh, yeah, very. Because I was just so physically ill. I was losing all that weight from, obvious sort of ways of losing weight. And no one had any idea what was going on. So, some, undiagnosed infection or whatever. So it was, I wasn't really even at home. I was in the hospital most of the time.
Yeah.
So I was still mobile, but, pretty ill, but just sort of hanging around waiting for specialists at the Sand Hospital pretty much.
Yeah. Be terrifying as a parent, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
With kids, knowing that there's something wrong with your child, but you don't know what it is.
Yeah, for sure.
And seeing their body change and over a couple of month period, wow.
Yeah, crazy.
That'd be tough.
Yeah.
And the diagnosis, were you in hospital when you got the diagnosis?
Yep. So that's the thing, you're going to say what day? I have no idea because days went out the window. There wasn't I wasn't working or anything. I was way too ill to be working. So there was no weekends. There was no days. So the day I have no idea. I just remember the date. But yeah, so I was diagnosed with grey zone lymphoma, which is a rare type of blood cancer, sort of like leukemia, if people haven't heard of that. Yeah, it's kind of like they call it grey zone because some people might have heard there's Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They're sort of the typical ones that lots of people unfortunately get diagnosed with, and they come with quite specific treatment plans. Grey zone basically means it's got combinations of each. It's very rare. There was I think they said 6 cases in Australia at the time.
Yeah.
And there is no specific plan, so they kind of got to sort of throw the book at you and see how you take it.
Yeah.
But I remember the day obviously so well. I think the first thing that happened was I was just so angry.
Really?
Just angry. Yeah. And so angry made me really energetic for a very short period of time.
How did they tell you? What do you remember the conversation?
it's a funny one because I'd been told I didn't have cancer many times during that process, many times.
Yeah. Okay.
So for someone to finally come back and say, well, it is, and this is what it is, they just came out and tell you. I've unfortunately heard this diagnosis a few times, and they're just straight to the point. To be honest, I think that's the doctor's way, which is fine. And then I think they give you a bit of time just to, see what's going on, and then you sort of come up with a plan. But the first reaction was just that anger, and I remember just pacing up and down the walkway of the ward.
Wow,
just angry walking, I guess would be my way of describing it.
Yeah.
And then that sort of, like, to be honest, settled quite quickly, like within minutes. And then I was sort of on to managing the family, and and that was the first thing I was thinking about, to be honest. After the anger was, okay, well, I'm going to see my wife, my parents, my grandma, my grandpa, my brothers, etc., friends, family, etc. And so then I was just managing the message, to be honest, as someone, who luckily enough been through things like management training, and, I actually know how to manage a message. So I was basically trying to feel, have people feel as comfortable as possible about what was happening. Yeah. That was a good distraction, to be honest, because I wasn't thinking about it for myself. Yeah. I was thinking about it for how I could manage the message to family to start with. So, yeah.
That's interesting. When was the first time, once you'd managed the message?
Yep.
Do you remember it, because I would imagine that being by yourself in those early days would have been tricky. Do you remember that? Do you remember a time where you were by yourself and you thought, oh shit?
Yeah, definitely. Probably like a month on from there.
Yeah. Okay.
I think, like, even though I was really ill there, I actually got way sick after that. So at least at that time, I didn't feel physically vulnerable. I was ill, but I wasn't physically vulnerable. I think a month or two after that, I was like, I'd lost way more weight than that. And I was actually physically quite vulnerable. So if it was the middle of the night in hospital and no one else is there, as expected, they need to go home, and there's not a nurse around or something like that, and there's some problem. That was when you have that sort of vulnerability of being alone. Yeah, and that could be a physical thing, but it can be a mental thing as well. Yeah. But like for a good while there, my wife and mum and dad, they were basically on an 8-hour shift, eight every day, because I was so vulnerable that it was like they were just felt like they had to be around. So for a while I wasn't by myself at all, really. So it's a strange one.
And so you get this diagnosis. What's the plan?
So when they finally told me, they're like, we've just got to get you to a different hospital. So I was at a private hospital that at the time, the Sand didn't have a cancer center. They had some facilities for cancer, but not something as sort of advanced as this. So one of the professors, who was great, told my dad, he said, if my son was going through this, I'd send him to Concord Hospital. They've got a great hematology department. You're going to be dealing with experts from around the state. And my doctor was actually the head of hematology for Concord, so she's one of the basically world-renowned experts. And he basically said, go there. It's there's no cost element. Not that was probably a factor at the time, but it's a public hospital, but they've got a great hematology department. So they shipped me off to Concord in a patient transport service. I remember at the time, the last nurse that I had at the Sand, she was actually trying to sell me a property at a golf course on the Central Coast. So she gave me this squishy golf ball, and she's got me squishing this golf ball to try and get my veins up and stuff like that. And she's trying to sell me a property. Hopefully she was doing it to actually distract me from what was happening.
That she owned?
I don't know if she owned it or whatever. I think she was in it as well. She just wanted me to come and join this great community or whatever. Okay. And I just remember she was just trying to sell me some property at Magenta Shores on the Central Coast. Anyway, suddenly they bundle me into a patient transport service. I get to Concord, and whilst they got great doctors there, the hospital is from the 1950s. Honestly, it's literally a post World War II hospital. The facilities are terrible. Again, great people, terrible facilities. Nothing to do with the people. And at the Sand, private hospital in Wahroonga, leafy suburb of Sydney, one of the most leafy. I'd get whatever I want. I had, Foxtel on the TV. I'd get ice blocks and things like that wherever I want. Got to Concord. I'm in a shared room. I'm like, oh, can I get an ice block or something? We're like, what? What are you talking about? There's no valet service here. And they were just straight into it. So I think I started chemo that afternoon. They just said, so this is the first thing. We've got to get you into remission. And then the plan will be to go to a stem cell transplant. So basically, there's two options from a stem cell transplant perspective. You can either get yourself back to healthy in terms of not having cancer through chemo, and then they take your stem cells out and hold on to them for a while and basically re-inject them a little bit further down the track, again when you're healthy, and then your immune system rebuilds around your own stem cells. The other option is to get a transplant from someone else. So often it can be siblings. So my brothers were tested; they didn't match, which is common, but the most common people it would be with our siblings. So then they go out to a global network, and one of my friends now actually works at someone who's a part of this network. They actually came into the Dell office just before I left Dell and got a whole 60 people to register for this, in the Australian Tissue Network. But anyway, so you can basically go just through a swab, not through any tests or anything like that. You can basically see if someone's compatible just through a swab. It goes into a global database, and when something like this happens, the call goes out. We need someone who'll be a match. And I had 2 matches. I had one in, I think it was Canada, and there was another somewhere in Europe. I can't remember, maybe France or Germany again. But at the time, because I was so ill, we made the decision. They said that it'll be more successful if you do it with someone else's. However, if something goes wrong, like it doesn't hold, then you'll be susceptible to infection for probably 2 or 3 months. And if that's the case, you'll basically have no immune system for 2 or 3 months, and someone brings in a cold or whatever like that, and you're gone basically. Whereas if it's your own immunity, you're probably susceptible for 10 days. So the risk is much less. So because I was so weak, we basically said, no, I think the best thing is let's start with something that we know will be safer, and let's see if it works. And it did work, and that was in July the next year, July 2012. So I sort of I guess my timeline was diagnosed on the 17th of October, started chemo, whole bunch of terrible complications with that. Probably at my sickest in sort of New Year's Day 2012, into then sort of recovery, a lot of physical recovery, putting weight back on. That was probably one of the fun parts, Nutritionist said,
give me a picture of you at your sickest.
So me at my sickest, I was 59 kilos. And even though I'm sitting on your very low couches here, I'm 6 foot tall. So 59 kilos is not good when you're 6 foot and sort of broad shouldered, I guess. Yep. So, I basically look like the dude on some of those cigarette packets you see. Bald head. I had really yellow skin because the cancer was attacking my liver, and I'd done a pretty good job of attacking my liver myself, but it was doing a way better job. So I had that sort of jaundice type look, bald head and things like that from the chemo. Bloodshot eyes are terrible. And I don't know when it was, but probably in mid-December, the worst thing that happened to me in the whole process was I got peripheral neuropathy, which I still have in my feet. But peripheral neuropathy is basically nerve damage, severe nerve damage to your hands and feet. It can happen through chemo. It happens to people with diabetes and other types of illnesses as well. Some people get it minor and you sort of live with it. At the time, I couldn't pick up a glass of water with my hands, and my feet, I couldn't walk at all. So suddenly I just couldn't walk. I remember I just tried to stand up one day and I just fell over. I'm like, what the hell? I just couldn't feel my legs properly. So that was the hardest. So then it was, wheelchair and, straws out of cups and things like that. And do you think that do you think that as you're feeling your body weaken, yep,
and seeing it change, where are you at mentally? Is that diminishing at the same time, your will and resilience and your ability to kind of keep going, or would you say that was kind of strong most of the time?
To be honest, it was strong most of the time,
yeah.
The will side of things, because even when I was going through a lot of that treatment side of things, and even the rehab that had to happen for the physical side, I had a real desire to survive, but not just a desire, but I had a real feeling that I was going to. Doctors told me 3 different times that you're going to die, as in now.
But you never thought you would.
No, I'd all sorts of expletives. Not sure what sort of rating you're going to have for this podcast, but
X.
Yeah, there you go. Well, mate, honestly, I did tell doctors to fuck off a couple of times because all I said to them was, "You don't know how I feel," and even sometimes when sometimes when I was going through chemo, I didn't feel as sick as I was before I was diagnosed and I started treatment, even though the chemo was killing my body. But I still felt like there was fight inside me, mentally definitely, but definitely physically as well. I just knew it, and it's one of those things like you start to get in real harmony with your body. Like you start to really know what's happening. And let's say I'm a 1 out of 10 in terms of my health at that time. I'd know if in a day if I was a 0.1 out of that, or a 0.9, or maybe a 1.1, I was actually feeling a bit better than that. You'd actually know what was going on. I remember one time when I was out of hospital, my mum took me back for some test. Every time I went to the hospital, I used to have a test at least once a day, like a blood test, all sorts of information. And one time they came back and they said, "You've got problems with your kidneys. That could be a real problem." And I said, "I don't have a problem with my kidneys." And they're like, "Well, sorry, we're the doctors." I'm like, "I'm telling you, take another test. There's some mistake. I've never had a problem with my kidneys. I'm actually feeling really good today. I'm not staying here tonight." I was probably a bit stubborn about not wanting to stay in hospital. But anyway, they did another test and there was just some mistake with the test. And they said, "Yeah, there's nothing wrong with your kidneys."
And that was genuinely how you felt, right?
I just knew there was
trying to talk your way into
No, I absolutely felt it. I absolutely knew it. So that's why I was like quite stubborn with the doctors, because even though I was mentally quite strong at the time, there was times when I just knew it wasn't my time yet, physically as well. So,
and they said that 3 times to you over the course of that illness.
Yeah. The hard thing about that is because mum and dad and Beck were on the 8-hour shift. Yeah. Every time I got told, my dad was there.
Oh no!
So he aged pretty quickly then.
Man.
No, he's all right.
Oh my
But
God.
he always got the rough end of the stick, and then it'd be mum or Beck are there when it's like, "Oh, actually, maybe you get good news."
Yeah.
And you get that little bit of news. It's there's a bit of improvement for whatever thing. And they were enjoying the celebration times, and Dad unfortunately got all the bad ones.
Yeah. And how would they say it? Is it just
they just say things like, they just like really think you should get your affairs in order, those types of things like that. Okay. That would be their type of thing. So, and
you'd hear that, and rather than feel scared, you'd go, "No, that's not where I'm at."
Yeah, I'd probably feel a bit scared, but not as much as the pushback, to be honest. You sort of look back at it and there's maybe other things that I should have been more scared of, but just didn't even know what was happening at the time. So you're just going through it. So
yeah. And so you're ill from October the 17th to July the following year.
Yeah, officially. But what they basically did, they got me to remission, took out my stem cells, and then the chemo had done all this damage to me. So then I got a couple of months off. And they said, what's going to happen is it's going to come back, but we're going to allow it to come back. We need you before the stem cell transplant. That's when they give you the hardest chemo. So they give you chemo to intentionally take your immune system to zero. They want it zero so you can start again, basically. So they know it's going to be bad. So they're like, we actually need you to be physically better before we can give you the stem cell transplant. So that's why I had like a 6-month break-ish. I had some chemo, but not that much. So that then it became very much a recovery thing. So starting like physical recovery, thankfully my hands came back really quick, which was good because then you feel a lot more independence. When you can't use your hands, like you just
big time
independence is shot. Not being able to use your legs and your feet, like it's obviously terrible, but you can have a lot more. You can still have independence. Like we can find a way. Like I was using, wheelchairs into like walkers and walking sticks and things like that, and I just you could just find a way, and obviously with lots of support and stuff like that. So I basically had to, like, all I focused on then was, it was like, I don't know, it was like recovering from an ACL or something. All I was focused on was just getting back to walking, and also putting on lots of weight. So my nutritionist was awesome. She didn't try and stuff around and, say, eat all these healthy greens and all that. She's like, you need to put on massive amounts of kilos. Yeah. So however you can do it, don't try and Google anything around, clean eatings or anything. So just if you feel like pizza one day, eat 2 pizzas if you can. Like you just have to put on, way more weight just to help with your recovery, your muscle build, and all those things. So anyway, so I was trying to be a fat bastard even though I was quite skinny at the time.
Okay, and so the stem cell takes hold.
Yep.
And that's a good day. I'm assuming when someone comes in and says, it looks like it's
a funny one. So you go in. So the stem cell process to get it out, God, that was a nightmare of a day. One of my brothers was there at the time, and I was out of it. Like some of the stuff he told me, I was at one point, apparently I thought I was in a nightclub, and I thought it was the middle of the night and like really dark. It was just the middle of the day in hospital. I had no idea. Like I was so out of it, and that was a really sort of painful process. I don't think it's supposed to be a painful process, but just the nature of everything that was happening to me at the time was very painful. So they were just putting all sorts of drugs into me. But then
I'm assuming that they're taking that out of your spine.
Yeah. So
which doesn't sound great.
No.
Even that doesn't sound fun.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they say, apologies to any female viewers who are mothers, but they say the pain from a spinal tap is the worst pain you can feel, but it only goes for a very short amount of time. So it's not like childbirth, which is worse because apparently it's not as painful, but obviously it's a much longer process. Whereas that sort of like 8 seconds of whilst they're into your spine is like, I can almost feel it, like it just hits the middle of your brain, like the pain. But then it's over. It's kind of like having like too much wasabi. Once it's over, it's over. It doesn't hang around.
Okay.
So, but the process to put it back in was nothing. Like I walked in and I think it took half an hour. Okay. I was feeling good at the time. I wasn't ill or anything like that. I think Mum and one of my brothers were there at the time. We went and had a pub lunch on the way home. Still trying to put weight on. And then you wait for sort of like your immune system to go to zero. And once that happens, then you have to go to hospital, and so that you can basically be in a protected environment whilst it's trying to take hold. And they said that would be about 2 to 3 weeks I'd be in the hospital. And I was only there for like 10 days. And it was a bit of like a record for when someone could get out. Beck was actually on a hen's day because she's thinking I'll be out in about 4 days. So she's at a friend's hen's day. On the drink and couldn't come and get me. So I had to call up a mate to come and get me, and he was very happy to take that call and bust me out that day. And then that was it. And so basically I was allowed to leave that day because I wasn't ill and my immune system had come back, and it was just, let's see how it works. And then from then I had just, plenty of tests, on a regular basis. And that was like, 12 years ago. I've never had anything come back since that time. So it was pretty crazy how actually well it worked, and in a way how short the process was. I remember someone, I can't even remember who it was, but someone early in the process, obviously a doctor, I guess, but someone said, this thing will either kill you or you'll kill it. It wasn't something that was going to hang around forever.
Oh, I love that.
It was either going to get you or you were going to get it back. So it gave you something to focus on and not have to, I guess, think about the longer term side of it. It was just all you got to do is kill it. And thankfully, the work of all these amazing doctors and not just doctors, but because you talked about foundations and things like that. One of the foundations I sort of helped start is around clinical trials. Like clinical trials is what leads to these types of outcomes, because if you don't do clinical trials, then you're not doing breakthrough treatments. And my dad went through a process, and clinical trial actually cured him from a cancer. And so investing in things that lead to things like clinical trials, they're really important because they're the things that help with actually breakthrough treatment for all types of diseases. So pretty amazing.
I've got to ask you this question. You won't be surprised about me asking you this question.
We'll see.
Were you religious before this?
No.
What was your worldview in terms of what you're doing here?
Mate, just so many Australians.
Just doing time?
No,
like the rest of the world?
Yeah, look, so many Australians are not that religious, and I'm sort of one of those.
Yeah.
And it's, sort of upbringing as much as anything. Like I'd say I'd have some elements of spirituality, like things that happen in your life, including this, but even before that, where you would, you're just, seeing that perfect day, or, that perfect day at the beach or in the rainforest, or it's, in some time on a holiday where you just have that experience that's a spiritual type experience. I have experienced that. And then during this process, when you really, you do have, further on in the journey, I did have a lot more time to myself. You're obviously spending a lot of time reflecting and on things. So you're probably thinking a lot like that. But yeah, the religion thing didn't enter into it too much, apart from sort of family members or friends who are quite into it, and they'd give me various different things that had been blessed and things like that, and I'd hold on to them as much as to remember their support. But I would still feel something from that. So that was sort of the extent of it. But
there was nothing about that experience that sort of made you or inclined you to want to kind of investigate the internal.
Not really.
No, really.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Not for me. Yeah, I think like if I was thinking anything internal, it would be like the mental side of things, the impact of positivity on health outcomes and attitude on health outcomes, which maybe has some kind of link to the spiritual side, but I would probably more classify it into that, into the mentality side of it.
Can you talk to that for a minute? I mean, how much do you put your recovery down to your mental perspective?
A lot. And it's not to say that the reality is, and you knew me beforehand, I was always pretty like fun, positive type of person.
Yeah.
And after this, I'm a bit more of a positive person. I've always been a positive person. I've had a positive type of upbringing. That's just sort of what I'm used to, and it's just sort of my nature. But I walking around the ward, you could see people who are deflated. And people, to be honest, who are way more healthy than me. And you'd honestly, it was a terrible thing to do, but you would see people in a room and think that person's going to make it, that person's not. But I'd be doing it not on the back of the physical side. It's not like I'm reading their charts or anything, but how they'd like hold themselves around, in terms of talking to doctors or just their general demeanor. Like I was pretty much always the sickest person on the ward. But I'd be, whenever I was physically able, before I lost, my feet and stuff like that, I'd be always walking around and saying hello to nurses and cracking jokes and, all sorts of things. And just, you'd see other people like that as well. And I'd go, that person I think's going to make it.
Yeah.
But I'd see other people that, again, were just way more healthy than me. I just thought, where's this going to go?
Were you actively trying to be positive, or do you think this is more just a reflection of just the software that you were downloaded with?
Yeah, I think the software and also just like trying to have a bit of fun with things, trying to make I was in the hospital for pretty much that whole time, from sort of August till pretty much December, and then lots of visits after that, and just trying to make it a bit of fun as much as anything. And I wasn't trying to be positive. It was just trying to make the most of the situation. And like, sometimes I think back to Beck and situations we had when we were sitting around. All sorts of funny stuff happens in hospitals. Like, it's funny at the time. Like afterwards, you would think about it, and maybe it's not so funny. But you laugh at little things all the time in hospitals. Yeah, and you have little jokes, and heaps of funny things happen. Like my dad, put my dad in it again. He's going to watch this podcast too, probably, so he'll get the shits. But one time he dropped me out of my wheelchair. Like, he's a bit of a rushes around like a maniac, and he dropped me out of my wheelchair. He felt so bad, because I was so fragile at the time. Nothing happened, thankfully, but things like that. But now we just like things like that we laugh about. All funny things. Like when I was growing up, again, back to my dad, he used to always say, don't stop using all that deodorant when I'm a 16-year-old boy trying to smell good and things like that. Stop using that deodorant, it'll give you cancer. And when he first came into the hospital after being diagnosed, I go, it must have been the fucking deodorant.
I remember an obsession with men's aftershave when I was in my teens, like Dracar Noir.
No, mate, we're talking Lynx Africa. We're talking the terrible stuff.
Yeah,
it probably was the cause. Yeah.
Can we talk about your relationships with your family and Beck?
Yep.
Because I would imagine that in the intensity of trying to get Jade healthy, that probably brings people together.
Yep.
But once that pressure valve is released, then what does life look like in terms of these relationships, and what does my return back to normality look like? Can you kind of walk me through?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll talk about the main three people. There's three people on the 8-hour shift. That's the easiest probably thing to explain. So like with my parents, they've gone to effectively like caring for their 30-year-old son like I was 2 months old. They're there the whole time. So, and then as things were starting to get better, so after that, after stem cell, and obviously I'm continuing rehab and things like that, I went back to work in October that year, 2012. Starting to travel again. I started driving again, maybe in, I don't know, September or something like that. So you're just doing your own stuff, and you're starting to go back to normal life in a way, apart from the tests and still a lot of rehab and things like that, physical rehab. For them to then let go and go, right, let Jade back to normal life. And I moved out of home when I was 19, so I hadn't lived at home for 11 years. It's not like I'd moved out of home a couple of years beforehand. So for them, that was hard for them to let go, and so that causes some friction, because then I'm moving on a path of independence, and they're in a positive way trying to hold me back in a way, and stay there in that back in that caring mode that they just had to adapt to all of a sudden. So that, that leads to the odd tension, and, argument and things like that, but nothing, nothing too difficult. With Beck, like, you can imagine what, she's gone through in terms of someone I pretty much look like I do now. That's sort of what I used to look like when I was 30. And then I suddenly look like that dude on the cigarette packet.
Yeah.
And during a lot of that time, she's showering me, she's helping me with, dramas that I've had or whatever. So like say, you're old, 30-year-old, and suddenly I'm like basically like a 90-year-old, ill 90-year-old. She's dealing with that side of things from which obviously, is not great.
And she's a young woman.
Yeah, exactly. She's a young woman. We have this 2-year-old daughter. There was intent for future other kids, and that was sort of knocked on the head through the illness. So, there's that side of things, and then I think the other thing was that it drove us apart because we did end up separating for a year, maybe about a year after, maybe a year, 18 months, 2 years after I was sort of better. I think the divide became because I was almost on this positive high, because suddenly it's like, you almost feel, I don't really feel like this, but you're like a bit superhuman that you've beat something crazy that you weren't supposed to.
Yeah.
And sort of everything that comes with that. Like we were opening cancer centers, cutting the ribbon. We were involved in helped start a charity, and I was doing, videos for the Red Cross. I was doing speeches for the Red Cross, awards nights for the Red Cross, doing all this cool stuff, and everyone's, patting you on the back saying, how good of a job you've done. So I'm on this huge kick of positivity. I'm back at work. Work was going great. I was continuing my sort of rise from a career perspective. And then, at the same time during that, let's say 2 years, Lily's moving from that age group of sort of 18 months, 2 years into 3, 4, 5 years old, where she's getting independence as well. So Beck's gone from caring from a 2-year-old and call it a 90-year-old, to suddenly a 90-year-old's back like a sort of 40-year-old, running around just being, normal sort of person doing normal stuff and, independent. Like I've always been quite independent. And Lily's, off at preschool and having fun with her friends and going to birthday parties, and so that sort of sense of purpose for like care was just diminishing. So we were on very different paths, I think, at that time. So that's sort of reflecting. That's my way of explaining it for really anyone, but for something like this for sure.
And how much of that separation would you put down to the cancer?
What the cancer put us through, like it would be 90% of. There's always other niggling things in relationships that probably don't help, but it's like the us just going on totally different paths. So any other challenges we've been through in relationships before this happened, we're still on the same path. We're still on the same journey together of parenting, of career goals, of wanting to put a deck out the back, of wanting to put that pool in, and building towards that, or maybe buying a better house one day, or moving to a different suburb. Like we're on that same journey together, and then suddenly it's like a lot of those things are just out the window. We're not even thinking about those things anymore. Like I even on that front, like I remember maybe I'd say it was probably September before I was even diagnosed. Like, you're thinking about paying the mortgage and money and all that sort of stuff. I'd realized in September that for 6 weeks I hadn't even touched like a debit card, a coin, a note. I hadn't even made a transaction because I'd just been in hospital that whole time. The only time, like, I might have taken a $5 note out and given it to someone to go buy me an ice block or something when they didn't have money themselves. Like I literally hadn't touched the concept of money. I hadn't touched for 6 weeks. So things that, are just part of our daily life of transacting, suddenly it's like that doesn't even matter at all. And I literally hadn't even touched, transactional things. So things change real quick in relationships, money, everything. So that's kind of, and you kind of touched on exactly what I wanted to get to, is because I would imagine that that's a bit of a jolt for a partner, like seeing, your young husband ill and then having to be a nurse for him and wash him and look after him and maybe dress him and support him and have all of your energy go into that individual, and then for that to stop. Yep, exactly.
Because there's always it's that archer analogy, when you pull the bow the bow back, it's when you let it go, there's a rebound effect to that.
Yep.
And that would have been difficult to navigate, not just as a couple, but also for Beck.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yep. No doubt. So yeah, that's what happened, because it happened quite fast, really.
Yeah.
Like after that stem cell transplant, it was a couple of months, and suddenly I was driving. Suddenly, not long after, I was back to work, and it was just all back to the grind of normal-ish life.
How long did that? You mentioned the word. I kind of felt bulletproof. I'd beaten this thing.
Yeah.
How long did that feeling last?
Years.
Okay.
Years, because I'd had, I'd had tests. I probably had tests for about 3 years afterwards, and then it got to a point where my doctor said, "Well, the test that I had to have was so complicated, like nuclear medicine and things like that, that the tests were probably going to give me the next thing that would give me a different type of cancer." So I stopped doing the test. And they were, because they were always 100% clear. So yeah, for quite a while, and it's a mental thing more than a physical thing, to be honest, because there's other things as well where I didn't feel bulletproof at all. Like, so from a physical point of view, and like some of the hardest things as you're getting out, like at the time when you're going into rehab to try and learn how to walk again and things like that, all you're focused on is like the next stage. So going from a wheelchair to a walker, going from a walker to crutches, going from crutches to a walking stick, going from a walking stick to nothing. Like every step forward, you think if you get to that next thing, that's all I need. It's just, it'll be so much better if I had crutches instead of a walker. And then you got crutches for a while. And then it'll be so much better if I just had one crutch, not two. And then suddenly you're walking again. And then that's sort of, unfortunately for me, that's where it stopped. That's where physical limitation said, because then the next thing, that sort of crawl, walk, run. My next thing was supposed to be run, but I still can't run today. So just the nerve damage, the balance, the strength issues, I can't do it. So
what are the physical limitations that you've got because of this?
Yeah, so it's basically not being able to have kids and the nerve damage are the two things that I still have, and that's forever basically. Yeah, so, okay. I'm pretty good at hiding the nerve damage thing until walking up and down steps is an obvious one, or if someone wants to play touch footy or soccer in the park or something, I'm not a participant. But yeah, 99% of people.
Have you come to terms with that, or does it still piss you off?
I'd say I've come to terms with it. But it does still piss me off, and it used to piss me off so bad. And I'd have dreams of running and playing like football like almost every night. I'd wake up from a dream thinking, "Oh, I can run again," and like I'd maybe even go and I used to push myself so hard in rehab to try and do some certain running, and I can do these terrible crap weird jog stuff, but then like. Even if I did that now, I could do it, but then I wouldn't be able to walk for like 5 days. It would just, I can never recover in a way that I can actually just build on that. Yeah. So it's still frustrating, but I'd say I've come to terms with it for the most part. But certainly early on, like the frustration of not being able to just do little things is terrible. Like, and especially with your daughter growing up, again, Lily's about 4, and there's things that. You'd want to do with a 4-year-old. If she was a 4-year-old boy, like there'd be a lot we'd be missing out on. Yeah. But the thing for Lil is that she grew up with when I was first ill, when she's 2-3 years old, lying on the couch a lot, not being able to walk. That's what she grew up with. So she was used to me being not the one that could help her physically. So she adapted to that, and then that just filtered through 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. To the point where that's just the way it was. So, but. In other circumstances, you'd be missing out on a lot of things that you'd love to do as a father for not having that mobility, for sure. But because Lil adapted to it, it probably wasn't that bad. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that the bulletproof didn't last forever.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in that part of the conversation because because part of me kind of thinks that you'd go if you were able to get through an event like that that's challenging and is threatening to take your life.
Yep.
Then, part of me kind of thinks, well, if you've gone through that and you've done that, would that kind of give you some sort of mental and emotional immunity to all the other shit that happens in life?
Yeah.
And I'm interested to understand whether, does that resonate for you? Like that question?
Oh, definitely. So one thing that I still have today, and is like, I just don't really sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
If there's small challenges at work that other people think are big, to me they're not big.
Yeah.
Like, so that's just one example. It could be anything. It can be, I don't know, people going through I don't know, some kind of challenge in whatever. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. But financial things, whatever. A lot of those things, I just don't sweat the small stuff. I didn't back then, and I still don't. But the thing where the bulletproof thing sort of wore off was I'm trying to think of what sort of time frame it was. It was about 2014. So we're sort of talking 3 years, 2-3 years after I was better. Like, I started getting physical symptoms of anxiety that I had no idea was anxiety. I'd never had any mental health challenges. I'd never had anxiety. I'd never had depression. That's not been a challenge either, but the anxiety side of things. So anyway, so I'm getting all these physical symptoms of anxiety. I'm getting things like, ringing in the ears, headaches, can't breathe properly, tight chest, there's all sorts, stomach issues, all sorts of things that, people who are listening with anxiety would know about. But I didn't know it was related to anxiety because it was presenting itself physically, all these physical things. And I was freaking out because I had convinced myself through that sort of like that, being held in that little box that you sometimes get in when you're anxious, that I was convinced that I had cancer again. And I'm like, right, because I hadn't had a test for a while. I'm like, I've got to go back and have one. Anyway, I booked in a session eventually because I had no idea what I was going through. Booked in a session with a cancer-specific psychologist back at Concord Hospital. We ended up sitting down for like 2 hours. And she goes, okay, I'm going to take a bit more time here. But she goes, based on sort of how you, I guess, understand things, I think if I explain what's happening with you, that maybe we don't even have to see each other again. And so she explained all the physical side of it, the fight versus flight, and all these types of things, breathing and getting your breathing right, and all sorts of stuff. And I haven't hardly seen a psychologist since. But at the time, I definitely did not feel bulletproof. I'd actually, even though I was just driving to the hospital to go see a psychologist, I actually packed my bag. Because one thing about when you rush to hospital, you don't have all the stuff that you want. You don't have your favorite toothbrush or the clothes you want to wear or whatever you need. I packed my bag because I thought I'm going to see a psychologist, but she's also going to say, oh, maybe it is physical and maybe go into ER and get some tests or whatever. So I'd actually packed my bag, and then I driving in thinking, who knows how long I'll be in hospital again, and this nightmare is going to start again. But I ended up just driving home that afternoon. A few breathing exercises on the way home, and that just made life a lot easier. And like, I still get anxiety, but at least I know now. At least I know probably why I've got it. I know what I can do about it, how I can avoid it, and things like that. But yeah, from that point, I think that's when the bulletproof side of things definitely broke down, because I was at a point where I was driving to hospital to be admitted for at the time I thought I had probably brain cancer because it was headache type stuff. So yeah.
Wow. I'm assuming there are lots of lessons to be learned from having an illness like yours, or one you had.
Yep.
Are those lessons obvious, or did you have to look for them?
Depends on the types of lessons, I guess. If we're thinking big, deep lessons, or some of the logistical lessons, if you like. I think when I speak to people who are going through it, I often speak about the logistical lessons to start with, because they're simple things that you can do to maybe have a better experience than maybe I did, or things that I learned. So, like as an example, not Googling things. That's a big one.
Really?
Because if you're Googling cancer stuff, you're in trouble, because you pretty much only find the worst things, not the best things, or you hear about, I don't know, Chinese medicines that are going to solve things, and here's the nearest Chinese medicine person who's going to sell you a bunch of pills or something like that. So not Googling things is an important one. Not overthinking that there's some reason why you've got it. It's been your diet or something like that. So to fight cancer, I've got to totally change my diet. It's like, well, actually, when you're going through chemo and things like that, there's days to weeks when you don't even feel like eating. So when you actually have an appetite, like that's like a win when you're going through chemo. Eat whatever you want. Just give yourself the energy to be able to fight this thing, because in a few days' time you're going to be feeling like rubbish and you're not going to be eating at all. So, things like that are some of the things I talk through. The mental health side of things, I say, make sure you, even if you feel okay, proactively get some tools to deal with, say, anxiety as an example. If I had been given those tools beforehand, I would have known what was happening and realized there was probably some cause and something that was leading me towards it, and maybe I could have done something about it. In saying that, I did see psychologists during the whole process, but at the time they were always like, because I was dealing with things so well and it was very much focusing on the short term and the trauma of it all, and I was dealing with it all, they were just sort of, they'd be like, okay, that's okay. Whereas I sort of tell people, even if you're okay, even if your wife, your husband's okay, even if your parents are okay now, doesn't mean they will be in 3 years' time, which was my experience. So maybe proactively, get some guidance, and you might, again, learn some tools that help before you even need them.
What about the deeper lessons? Anything?
I don't know, mate. I have to think about it some more.
I know it's not your natural environment.
No,
it's not your play pit,
mate. You're the deep thinker here on these couches. But look, sometimes I guess I think about it, but hopefully, maybe what people have heard is that, like, I have an easy way of explaining maybe sometimes things that are quite difficult or are complex. But when it comes to some of the deeper thinking side of things, I haven't got the anecdote or the story to be able to explain it, to be honest. So. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So more of a in the world question for you. What do you reckon it cost you financially?
Hundreds of thousands. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot, because the amount of time I wasn't working, the costs of things like that specialist, the costs of staying in a private hospital for months and months, costs of rehab, the costs of, all Beck not working, we actually ended up having to sell our house. It's some, I can't remember when it was, maybe 2013, something like that. A house that, in the normal circumstance, and I probably earned more than twice as much now than I did back then. In a normal circumstance, there was no way I'd be selling that house. I'd be renting it, I'd be renovating it, and I'd be whatever. But we were selling it just to stay afloat, to avoid bankruptcy, to be honest.
Yeah.
And
that would have been scary. It's in itself.
Definitely.
Apart from having your illness, the fact that there's money going out the door, you're having to sell your house to stay afloat. I mean,
it was a bit after. Thankfully, like we kept things afloat. We had lots of good support from family and things like that, but it just got to a point where it's just untenable just to pay off all that debt and pay off all the different bills and things like that. It was just, the easier thing was just to kind of like start again and realize we had to start again. So I don't know. I think, it was a house we bought for like 500,000, sold for 700,000, might be worth nearly 2 million today. Things like that. To be honest, they're a bit frustrating. It's not something you dwell on all the time, but it's reality. It's an expensive world.
Yeah,
especially at the moment.
Is that part of, obviously? I mean, we were talking beforehand, and you're going through, a really fun and fulfilling and enjoyable part of your career, which has also been rewarding for you financially. Is that in your head? Are you playing the game of catch up financially to any degree? Is that kind of what's motivating your desire to make an impact, or is it just you're happy just to kind of make a contribution?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know if it's about catch up per se. You just want to get to a point where, if you go through these things again in the future, you just don't want to have to worry. To be honest, I don't want my daughter to be in a position where she has to worry, and get everything that she wants in life. So that's sort of that's the reason behind wanting to still have a very enjoyable career, but sometimes a high stress career that obviously comes with financial rewards at times. More so that than playing catch up. Look, like anyone, right? You can always compare yourself to someone, and from a financial perspective, there's always of course, there's always going to be people that are well better off, but there's so many people that are not. And even from a health perspective, like when I was sick, like I was typically the most ill person around, but obviously there was times when people passed on the ward, because again, I was in the ward for months. I was getting to know like people and things like that. So obviously there's people that have passed. There's people that I've told this story to that have passed. which is always, like you feel terrible, like, sort of survivor guilt and things like that. But you just, again, you see people around the hospital and you do see someone who's maybe carrying around a colostomy bag or something like that.
Yeah.
That's something that's happened because of their surgery that they've had to go through, and knowing that that's their whole life ahead with something like that. And then there's always someone worse off, for sure. So yeah, it's easy to make comparisons on the health side and the financial side, but one of those things, as long as we're secure and comfortable.
Yeah. Something that you might not know about me, I'm a massive Stevie Wonder fan. Yeah, I love Stevie Wonder. And little known fact is that I can't remember how old he was when it was offered to him, but at some point as an adult, like, because he lost his eyesight young.
Yeah.
And at some point as an adult, I think I seem to recall there was a procedure that they could give him it wouldn't have restored all of his vision, but it would have restored a lot of it. And he said no.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so I'm interested to understand from you, like I don't know whether you've watched The Matrix and the red pill, the blue pill, if there was a red pill that you could take that would mean that you didn't have to go through this experience, would you take that?
It's a tough one. I think if I answered you today, like right now, when I've just explained all this terrible stuff that I've been through, I would take the red pill to not go through it. But if I drove home tomorrow and I was thinking about it a bit more, I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't have had this experience as well. So in probably 24 to 48 hours, I'd probably say I wouldn't take the pill.
Yeah.
But right now I would say I'd take it, because I'm thinking, like, we've just been talking about finances or, like mobility and things like that. They're things I would love to have back. But, the experiences that I've got through this process, being involved with, the charities and, and the like, and just being able to talk to other people about it and, things like this, there is some enjoyment and sense of purpose in that. So yeah, it's I think it's depending on the time when you ask me the question.
That's a good answer. Yeah. That probably varies. I think, like I said at the beginning, I think you've got an amazing comeback story. Do you think your comeback is complete? Mate,
I don't think so. There's a lot more that I'd love to do, for sure, in areas that I can control. So I think that's a key thing is there's some things you can't control and other challenges that we'll keep facing. But if I'm doing the right things to control things that can improve in whatever area, that'll hopefully help with a bigger comeback. But look, for the most part, I feel pretty good most days. So it's been a interesting comeback for sure.
Yeah. Can we talk about Beck for a minute?
Sure.
Yeah. How is she?
Right now, really good. Really good. She's got 3 months off treatment. Her journey's been 3 years, and so 3 months off for her and for us is huge. She's almost at the point now where she doesn't know what to do. So there's only so much gardening and friends you can catch up with. So nothing until end of January, which is her next test. So so not having to go to the hospital for 3 months for Beck is massive.
Yeah.
So that's a really good positive sign.
Yeah.
We hope the next test will be good as well, like the last ones, and then that's one of those a different scenario with Beck's situation versus mine.
Maybe you could just, if you're happy to, just kind of skim the tops of the waves in terms of what's going on with
so Beck was diagnosed with breast cancer 3 years ago, just pretty much almost to the day. I think it was, I forget the date. Her date was like one day after mine. So one or two.
On the calendar, really?
On the calendar. I can't remember. Wow. It was like October 18 or something like that. So 3 years ago, so started her, breast cancer journey, very similar to, unfortunately what lots of women have to go through, double mastectomy, radiation, chemo, all the challenges that come with all of those things. And lots of sort of ongoing preventative sort of chemo. So lots of hospital visits, lots of tests. Got to a point about 18 months ago where things were going quite well. Like it had been a terrible process that she'd been through. Different scenario, like Beck always back. She came back very well physically. from things. Like she just bounced back incredibly well. Even if, even going through like a double mastectomy and radiation and things like that. So not a lot of side effects, but still a much longer process than what I've been through. I was sort of done and dusted in less than a year, and Beck's, still on her journey sort of 3 years in. She got some results about 18 months ago that were all clear, and like it was pretty just before Christmas, just before her birthday, real sort of celebrative type time for us, and things are feeling really good. And then it's only like 2 months later, she started getting some really bad headaches, to the point where one day she drove herself down to a hospital, said you need to get this checked out, got some scans, and she had 3 tumors in her brain. So the breast cancer had metastasized into her brain, and she was getting surgery the next day. So they were pretty serious. So 2 of the tumors were in places where they had to operate. Thankfully, in areas where they could operate, but still quite risky. And they said, but we have to, because otherwise, you're going to be affecting brain function, and it is dangerous where those 2 were. One of them quite small and in a different part of the brain. So they thought, too much trauma from too many surgeries. So actually, because it'd have to be like another surgery. Yeah. So they thought, we'll leave this one for now. We'll just get rid of the two bad ones. So, so it was like quite it's funny when you say things like this, but serious brain surgery. I guess every brain surgery is serious, but this was one where, was I guess you could be considered touch and go. She was in intensive care for, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, and then in a sort of ward for a little bit longer, and then sort of came home. Again, she bounced back ridiculously well. Like the day after she came home, and she was hopped up on steroids, which they give you for infections and things like that. She cleaned out our bathroom. She cleaned out like 3 garbage bags full of stuff out of our bathroom, because she just felt like she needed to clean the bathroom. So she came back physically so well, ready to, face what was next, which was, more radiation, and then sort of ongoing sort of chemo and stuff like that from there. But yeah, bounced back really well. And, she actually ended up doing a walk for the Mark Hughes Foundation in July last year, 150 Ks.
Wow.
Right. Like I couldn't, in my situation, I couldn't walk 10 Ks, to be honest. She walked 150 Ks over 3 days. Yeah. Was the top fundraiser in the event. And she was like the, I was going to say cheerleader, but the mascot of the event, if you like. Everyone was, really, rooting for her in the event, because they knew that she literally had brain cancer and was doing a walk for people that are raising money for brain cancer, because maybe their family and, had gone through those types of things. So she led that walk. It was awesome. I loved it as well as Beck loved it. She actually just found out yesterday the one for this year. So she wants to do it again this year. It's in the Knights play the Raiders in like July. I can't remember the date, but she'll be walking and doing it again this year. It was a great experience for her. And then, so that was July this year. Maybe 6 weeks after that, another test and a scan said, well, that 3rd tumor, the first 2 are gone, which was great news. So from the surgery and the radiation, so things were looking really good there. But the third tumor was growing, and they said, look, we've got to do another surgery. And this one was one where we had a bit more time to think about it. It wasn't as urgent, but that almost made it worse because we had so much time to think about it rather than just be in the hospital and suddenly it was just happening. Yeah. So had that surgery. It went really well, that surgery. So Beck was home in 4 days. Like, you could break your arm and stay in hospital longer than 4 days. She had a brain surgery and came out in 4 days. And then again, radiation after that. And that was probably 2 or 3 months ago now. And then her most recent test after that basically said that, things are looking, pretty clear. So that's why they've stopped any treatment for 3 months and just reassessing things. So that's the we go through the journey again.
Wow. Who's the better patient?
Who's the better patient? Oh God, I'll say me for sure. No, we both, I think we both got areas that we handle better than each other. Okay. Of the journey for sure. Yeah. But, Beck's definitely tougher than me for sure. She, to be able to go through this and then go and walk 150 Ks is crazy. We both go all right, I reckon.
Do you think it's easier and I say easy is absolutely the wrong word, but was it harder being a patient or a carer?
It's definitely harder being a carer.
Yeah. I would have thought so.
Absolutely, because when you're the one in the hospital bed, you're getting all the attention you need from world-class medical professionals, maybe even psychologically as well as physically. Anything you need, people are, friends and family are willing to drop anything and do whatever you ask. It's like seeing the look on their face and things like that. That's way harder. So then, when it's your wife who goes through the same a similar journey, it's definitely way harder. Having to you're doing things like then you're again managing the message, you're managing the communication with family members and friends and things like that, and having those conversations over and over again, and difficult. I reckon anyone who's been in the same situation, I would be very surprised if they didn't say the same thing.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I think everyone would say care is harder.
Yeah. Did you, you mentioned earlier that when you first got diagnosed, it was anger. Like of all the emotions,
Yep.
It wasn't sadness or fear, it was anger.
Yep.
Was there anger when Beck got diagnosed? Because I'd be thinking, what the fuck? Seriously?
It was surprise, like not in a good way.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say anger because that anger when it hit me, it was just so like raw. So that's why I can explain that it was anger. Whereas with Beck, it's sort of, it was kind of, we were kind of on a path to know that was happening.
Yeah.
Lump in the breast into a couple of tests, mammograms, blah, 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 into like you kind of knew it was happening. So it kind of expected, to be honest. So I was more thinking about the future of okay, like the treatment plan and what do we do next and what do we do next. So I was very much like, I'd say I was in firstly surprise and then planning for okay, how do we manage this and sort of go through that process and so just got into like pragmatic mode, I think, and which helps you avoid the mental anguish of it because I'm too busy planning and doing things that are involved in whatever the process is at the time to think about what's actually happening, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. Mate, we're looking to wrap about now.
Yep.
A couple of sneaky last questions.
Cool.
This is one from the depths.
Oh no.
So there was this, I don't want to do this guy a disservice.
Yep.
Soren Kierkegaard, he was like a philosopher from the Nordics.
Can you spell it? I'm the joke.
I could probably spell it. But he said, life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards.
Yep.
Which I think is so freaking profound. And I just, sometimes I think about that and think, wow, because if I think about my life, sometimes I kind of look at all the things that have happened and then I look at myself here and I think to your earlier point, I wouldn't have gotten here if all that other stuff hadn't have happened. And by the way, a lot of that other stuff was really uncomfortable.
Yep.
And so I guess the question is, having had this experience, is all this just random, do you think? Or is there some sort of, I don't know, divine engineering? At this point, and feel free to change your mind on that too as you you walk out of here and live your life. But at this point,
look, maybe there is an element to of the divine side of things for sure. It's hard to know, but I think the whole. You only know, once you get to the end about things, but like it's a weird one where you almost feel a bit blessed to kind of know, like almost like what end of life is hopefully way before you actually have it, because we've both Beck and I have been in situations where we've been pretty crook, so so it's a funny thing. You definitely don't take life for granted. You definitely enjoy things. So maybe we're a little bit lucky in that, and maybe there is a divine reason for that even though like terrible times and maybe tougher times still ahead, but we at least get to enjoy life and pretty good life for that.
Dude, thank you. I really appreciate it. I think the part of the idea behind this podcast was to find, I think I said this to you earlier, it's I think everyone's got a comeback story, but it's are you willing to kind of share that with people? And that's the part where, you know, people kind of go, there's some stuff here that I'm not necessarily sure I want the internet to be aware of. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've always just respected the fuck out of you for being willing to talk about this, not just as a one-off, but to be an advocate and consistently represent people that have been through, you know, illnesses like yours.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the reasons I love a good comeback story is it's really a redemption story. It's about coming back. It's about atonement. It's about forgiveness. It's about, you know, in the olden days, someone from the village would walk over a hill and figure out what was over there and come back and tell everyone and say, this is the path. You walk by the river. Don't turn left because there's a tiger down there. Avoid this part because there's quicksand. And those people would come back and they'd tell the village. And I think there's something really beautiful about being able to come back from a place that you've been to and that Beck's been to and tell the village, hey, this is the thing that you should avoid. This is what helped me. This is what encouraged me. I mean, you've spoken about mindset. Which I wasn't expecting you to say, you know. So I think there's a beauty in that. So
and it's a really good way to wrap up. Like, you know, for me, and one of the reasons why I'm happy to do things like this is because it is a privilege, you know, to explain, you know, where that tree is or where that tiger is, and, you know, avoid that tiger or whatever. Like, it is a privilege. It's something that I, when I do get that opportunity to speak to other carers, other patients, or sometimes it's contributors, people who are contributing to a fundraiser. And when I can explain my story or Beck's story and do a reasonable job of explaining the story, that is a privilege, because those stories lead to, like, we've raised some good money, to be honest, on the back of our stories, and that leads to that, like I was saying earlier, that next clinical trial that leads to that next, you know, person with a story like me to tell. So it is a privilege, and it's a privilege to tell it with you, mate. So thanks for your time.
I don't think your comeback story's over. Nor do I think Beck's is as well. So
awesome, mate.
I'm looking forward to seeing what you're both do.
Yep.
Thanks for being part of this.
Thanks, mate.
All right, brother.